Hello and welcome to another episode of the Strength Syndicate podcast. Myself, Shane Storey, and my co-host Lawrence King. Lawrence, how are you? How's your week been since I talked to you last?
My week has been, I suppose, productive. We have, so with my scholarship that I'm on with the PhD, we got good news that our funding is being increased, which is nice, which means I can drop off one or two of the several jobs I do. So that'll be nice. So, like, essentially, I'll be, for the first time in my life um, outside of PhD, I'll be coaching full time. I will have no other job other than coaching, which is kind of I never kind of expect. It's like you hear people doing it, and it seems so esoteric. It's like, oh, it's so far away, but it's not. No, I am blessed that I have S&C as kind of like my main income.
Yeah.
So that's Jesus Christ, S&C is such lovely work. It's great to work with teams. So I'm lucky in that sense, and obviously lucky to be working with abs as well. So yeah, so it's
Yeah.
nice.
It's nice.
It's
It's nice when you get to that point when you've like worked so hard to get to the point of kind of doing what you want to do long term. Like it takes a lot of graft, but once you get there, it's so satisfying.
Jesus, it's I think I'm very lucky in comparison to a lot of other people that are doing what I'm doing. Because like if you're doing a PhD, usually your funding is shit. You're not classified as a worker. You're not entitled to sick pay. You're not entitled to maternity leave. Any of these kinds of things. So and like while it's for men, we never have that question mark hanging over us. What if I get pregnant? Like it's not a worry for us. But if you're a woman and you're doing a PhD and you do happen to get pregnant in the middle of it, you're not technically entitled to maternity leave. So a lot of PhD students, their funding is quite poor. So like the average stipend in Ireland would be about 18,000 euros a year, and technically you're not allowed to work concurrently with that as well. So you're expected to live off 18,000 euros a year while doing your PhD. That's kind of the standard. If you're lucky to be on an employment based one where your employer might pay you 10 or 12, the IRC, the Irish Research Council, will match that, but not a lot of people are on those funding streams. So yeah, so I'm lucky to be coaching.
Yeah. I think like that was always like one of the things I found quite interesting, like when I would have been in university, because like while I did business, and business is not necessarily that kind of one of those degrees where you almost need to do like a master's or a PhD after. But a lot of like the science-based courses, it's almost like assumed that you're going to do it. And for the amount of graft that it takes for you to actually get, and like what the kind of allure has, like when you hear of somebody having like a PhD, you're like, oh wow, they've really made it. And it's like, how many PhD people do you know that are like absolutely rolling in bank?
No, none. Like literally none. No, none. And I actually think it's the type of person that's drawn towards. I suppose like it's one. There's two things. I suppose I think it's the personality type of the people that do PhDs, and that PhD work most of the time, the work that comes out of your PhD isn't actually yours. So if you develop a new technology, if I developed a new app for older adults and it's sold worldwide, that intellectual property isn't mine, it's belonged to the college.
Mm.
So even to monetize your PhD, it's very, very hard, because even in America, like if you were working on some type of I don't know, some type of GMO to make sure carrots uh, don't ever go off, or you've cured potato, you've some fertilizer that'll cure potato blight. You don't own that. You'd like it's your work. Like you maybe help develop it, and maybe your lab help develop it, but you're not entitled to a cent of it.
Mm.
Um, that's kind of it is the folly of it. Like you do really really have to love it.
Mm.
Um, and like you will pick up skills from it, but I think most of us that do PhDs, you really have to be kind of curious, and you have to be able to say like, right, I am willing to take a a longitudinal financial hit here to scratch that curiosity itch. And I suppose like with me, it's like strength training in older adults is something I'm genuinely interested in. So it's an easy. It's but yeah, it is very hard to monetize unless you're someone and you end up in a lofty kind of position within an institution. You become some kind of department head, or you feck off to America and you make loads of money there teaching in some Ivy League school. But those jobs are few. So yeah, Kate.
Between. Yeah, like I remember, like when I was getting into coaching initially, and like after I done like my PT search and stuff like that, my mom's like, well, like you have a university degree, so like surely you could go back and like do some kind of like masters in like nutrition or like exercise science, or like, you know, and then try to get a PhD or something like that. And I was like, the amount of time that would actually take for me to get that, and then like you have to assume then that because you get that, the people are more drawn to you as a coach. Where when realistically the time that was spent and the money is spent getting to that place, which could have been spent actually coaching more people and actually learning things that is more specific to the people that you work with. Because like once you get like your like initial kind of basic PT cert and your initial nutrition cert, you're going to learn a lot on the job. But then as well, there's like more specific courses to coaching people who have like health and fitness goals, versus if you go down the route of being like, oh, I want to get some letters after my name, like RD, you're going to be working with clinical populations that like have nothing to do with the person who wants to get jacked. You're going to be working with somebody who has like, I don't know, very bad eating disorder, or like is coming back from like bariatric surgery. And similar with like physio, you know, you're not necessarily going to go straight into working with elite level athletes. You're probably going to be working with people who are recovering from car crashes, you know, which I think that is like definitely when I was in school, that was like what I thought physio was going to be. I was like, I want to study physio because I thought I was going to be working with like, you know, fucking Irish rugby team, and like how many people actually get to that position.
What I think is really sold incredibly badly to people in school about like our kind of health, exercise science, sports science kind of areas, that performance is such a small piece of the cake in terms of what's actually available to you job wise, but also what's available to you in terms of the people you'll work with. Like when people start off PTing, it's a kind of a sobering truth that most of the people, if you do want to make a living off PT, are most of the people who are going to PT are not going to be people that are ever going to be high level athletes, nor have an interest in being a high level athlete. So yeah, so like even for me, like when I was in fourth year of college, I thought I wanted to do my UKSCA, which is I suppose kind of for anyone who doesn't know, the accreditation in S&C, that it would be like I suppose our kind of body in S&C, similar to CSCS. And I thought I wanted to work in elite level sports, but then I kind of got exposed to working with older adults, and I kind of realized that performance was kind of relative, and I was far more interested in the kind of like a health sphere than I was in performance. And even now I could see myself working kind of long term, like my kind of research route would probably still go down that route of older adults and health.
Yeah.
So it's
but
like you said, like with physiotherapy, it's kind of an assumption that you're going to be working with sports teams. It's like out of everyone that needs physiotherapy, athletes make up such a small proportion of that sample.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then even like what you touched on there in regards to like starting PT, and then assuming like, you know, you come in and you're like, oh, I'm so into like, you know, training, I'm so into like powerlifting or bodybuilding, I'm definitely going to attract all these people. And like the people who are into those sports, you know, realistically, well, like they're probably past the stage of PT, especially the people who you're probably going to get as a client. Like I suppose the people in that sphere that I see getting PT are like the likes of like the top level, like IFBBs who have like their trainer, like say like your man Henny Rambod, and
Yeah.
like him training like Seaborn and stuff like that in person. But that's like a very specific population because like like I would say they have the facility to be able to meet up with their trainer and be able to kind of perform those sessions. Whereas like if you're professional athletes essentially, whereas like when you start off as a trainer in a gym, like realistically, you're going to be working with, every Tom, Dick, and Harry that comes in the door because you want to build up a portfolio essentially. But it's also a good way to build your skills and kind of see who you do like working with. Because like definitely when I would have started working in a gym, I would have presumed had that kind of idea that like all these people are going to start coming to me for training, and obviously you guys met with the reality. But it did kind of show me that like I actually do quite enjoy working with people who are in the general population. I know now that I want to kind of start dipping my toes more into specific populations, of course, but you learn a lot through coaching people like that because you actually see where most people are in the kind of strength training kind of realm in terms of like what most people are capable of and what the average person actually looks like. Because I mean, if you spend a lot of time in gyms like abs or powerlifting gyms or in bodybuilding gyms, you get such a warped concept as to like what general fitness is and what the average person is capable of.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And even I suppose like similarly to that, maybe when I found it so hard to walk into like a GAA club or into like a senior hurling team or a senior football team and not be like, what do you mean you can't trap hard 200 kilos for 10 reps? Like you're looking at them like, are you not a man? Like, and then like I was like, what's wrong with me? I was like, why is my brain so toxic? But yeah, it's like you do become so warped to like, I suppose, strength standards from being in powerlifting gyms or like even our circle, like our friends, like you're around freaks all the time and you like you kind of lose sight that like 140 kilos is extremely heavy regardless of how trained or untrained you are.
Yeah.
I suppose go on.
I was gonna say like realistically, like when you are, and this can come down to people who are high level athletes as well to a degree, or at least want to be high level athletes. You spend probably most of your time with coaching at like the bottom of the pyramid, so to speak, with improving adherence and improving behaviors and improving lifestyle. And like there's so little time that's actually really spent on manipulating like the higher level variables, which almost seem like more interesting. But like if you can really get to grips with like understanding like client psychology and like people's motivations to actually like engage in their sport or engage in training, engage in their nutrition, like you're going to be so much more effective, like from a coaching perspective, because you can know all the intricacies of like training frequency, volume, like intensity, supplementation, nutrition. But if you can't get somebody to actually implement this stuff in the first place and consistently, like it doesn't really fucking matter.
Yeah, and like even it's kind of funny you said that because most of the intervention trials that we ran for the PhD, they've been massively centered around, I suppose, accessibility, adherence, retention throughout the length of the study, but also kind of like you'd be trying to include certain things that promote self-efficacy, that are trying to make people a little bit more confident around the task or around the general behavior. So, like you kind of said, a lot of the sexier things like volume and intensity or exercise selection or any of these kinds of things take a little bit of a backseat on those large scale interventions because it's more so about promoting, like you said, even if you're starting off with someone or someone starting off in strength training, it's about it is an awful lot more about adherence and promoting that behavior change as opposed to you need to do 3 sets of 3 at 2 RAR and you need this,
Yeah, I think like
less relevant.
Yeah, I think like no matter where you are as well within like your kind of training journey, you can always go back to the bottom of this pyramid as well, like in regards to like the adherence. Like, say for example, if I look back on my bodybuilding prep last year, right, extremely adherent to the entire process, and I could essentially manipulate the higher level variables throughout the prep, right, because like the adherence was spot on. Whereas like now, like coming out the back of the actual like prep and like into like recovery or back into gaining, like there's been a lot of days where I haven't necessarily been adherent to like my calorie goal, for example, right? So with that, then it would be kind of silly for me to be like to my coach, oh, do you think we should make an adjustment to like my macros here? I was like, well, first of all, you're not actually sticking to them 100% to actually see if we need to make a change, you know? So understanding that, and then like say, for example, you know, if you get an injury, for example, right, you could have been really adherent to your training program beforehand, but then you get injured and then you get a rehab program and you're like, oh, I don't want to have to do all these stupid isometrics or stupid tempos and rolling around the ground like in the gym, like it's a bit of a waste of time. And it's like, then you're back to the bottom of the adherence, like, you know, and then you don't necessarily get to graduate to like the next level up in the tier system.
It's like the stages of grief. It's a pendulum. All right, so you got some questions on the Dole Instagram there during the week. So I'm going to be Joe Rogan here, and I'm going to ask you the questions maybe.
Okay, you can weigh in as well, of course, because my opinion is only worth so much.
I'll put on my tinfoil hat here and fucking give you the lowdown. Okay, right. So we'll start off with one that's like some of the questions are pretty good. Okay. All right, this one's a bit left field, but I'm gonna give it something anyway and see what we come up with. I think this is gonna be the hardest one to answer. Okay. Harder for tall guys to fill out their, I assume you said fill out. Is it harder for tall guys to fill out their frame versus small guy? I assume he's meant versus a smaller gentleman.
Yeah.
Okay. So
harder than yeah, like I would imagine for a taller guy it's much harder to fill out their frame because they have greater surface area on their body to actually accumulate muscle tissue, as well with the resistance training movements as well. They're probably going to have to do, by definition, like more work because they have to move through greater ranges of space, essentially, when they're doing any kind of exercise. So say, for example, for a tall guy doing the likes of a squat, even if his proportions are relatively the same as a small guy, he still has to move through a greater amount of space. So potentially he has to do more work to kind of lift more load. So there's that kind of practical implication of him actually having to work a little bit harder in the gym. But then also for every gram of muscle that he accumulates, it is going to look less visually impressive on him than the guy who is smaller. And this is, I think this is why if you follow bodybuilding, you can see how bodybuilding and powerlifting, they are sports that are for midgets, essentially. You will accelerate, you will excel better in strength sports if you are smaller. They're probably the only two only sports where, other than like maybe being a jockey, where if you're smaller, it's an advantage. Like, because if you think about like football, basketball, like American football, all those sports, like, you know, if you're kind of bigger, you can essentially be a little bit more dominant. Whereas like with the likes of strength training, because of these kind of practical limitations, not being able to gain as much muscle mass, not necessarily being able to gain much muscle mass, but if you were to be 6'3" and absolutely jacked, you're probably going to have to be in the 120 plus weight class. Yeah. And then you are competing then potentially against guys who are going to really be, you know, on the very upper end of those weight classes too, who may be much smaller as well, you know. So you're literally fighting against gravity. What do you think?
No, I completely agree with you. I think for when I see tall guys versus small guys, I suppose for taller lads, I suppose we could kind of assume they're going to have a higher BMR, kind of off the bat. There's going to
Yeah.
be more, more skeleton, more muscle mass to support. So even when you're walking around, you're probably going to be burning more energy than the smaller person for the same reason that Shane said. There's more of you. You have to move through more space. So then that kind of leads to when you're adding up the calories, what you probably would need to take in would be substantially more if you were to be in a surplus than that smaller guy. And then, like Shane said, I think maybe from a what's the word I'm looking for? I suppose we'll go back to our adherence here again.
Yeah.
To fill out a frame for someone that is like 6'2" or 6'3", I suppose I am absolutely pulling this number out of my arse. But for someone that's 6'2" or 6'3", unless they were single digits of body fat, 100 kilos on someone that tall is not a substantial amount of weight.
No. No, it's
And
not.
the length of time for someone to go from maybe a body mass of about 85 kilos right up to that 110, 115 kilos where they're starting to look jacked and juicy. It's substantially more time than it might take a lad of 5'5" or 5'6" to go from 50 kilos to 60 or 75. Well, to go from 50 kilos to maybe 75 kilos. Because like it is about nearly 40 kilo difference that taller guy would have to put on to really, really fill out. Like you can look at someone, like I suppose a good example of this is Mark Stell. Maybe if people know the Mantis, like Stell could easily be a 100, like Stell is 105 or 110 kilos and shredded bits. And even Stell could be very comfortably 120 or 125 kilos and still be pretty lean, but he's like 6'3" or 6'4", is he, if not taller. So it's like you said though, like it's the taller you are competing against bigger lads then.
And I suppose as well, like if you think about it, like again, if you look at it visually or think about it visually, like somebody who is like, I don't know, 70 kilos and they are, 5 foot or something like that, right? Like they could have arms that visually look massive, like a 15-inch set of pipes on them could look huge. But then for the same person who is, 6 foot or whatever, and they have 15-inch arms, they will literally look like sticks, so like that's
15-inch python bikes out there.
But like, yeah, I suppose that's just the way the kind of cookie crumbles. I mean, like, look, you can't necessarily be fantastic at everything like that, your frame will
grow up and commit to fucking 10 or 15 years of training there before you expect to look fucking jack and juicy compared to your little small mate.
Exactly.
Right, I'm gonna go with these kind of. Okay, right. That one, like that was the most left field one. The rest of them are all fairly bog standard. I'm gonna go with this one because it referred to the podcast. So I actually learned two other people other than Conor Kieran listened to this. So shout out to Keen Madden and oh my god, who the fuck else said to listen to it? Someone else said to me. Third mystery person. But on your podcast, you discussed reducing the volume of your workouts during a peak. Do you count ramp up warm ups as part of the volume of a workout? So I assume by this person, I don't know, are they referring to ramp as in the ramp as in the abbreviation for raise, activate, mobilize, potentiate, or do they mean taking the bar and linearly increasing intensity as you work up to your top set? I assume that's what they meant.
Yeah, that's what I think.
Oh yeah, so I would say no. I would only count really ever sets that are prescribed as part of your program and meet kind of a minimum RP threshold. So, for example, like if your program is three, I don't know, let's say just 3 sets of 10 squats, 3 sets of 10 bench, at an RP of 6, your warm up sets you'd assume would be like RP 2 and 4 maybe. So you wouldn't really count them towards your volume because they're in such a small amount of difficulty that they probably wouldn't bring about any meaningful change. How's that sound? Sound about right?
Yeah, that's pretty much how I would address it as well. Like again, you want to think of a warm up is a warm up. It is there to prepare you for the working sets that are going to give you the actual kind of benefit that you're looking to get. If you were to count every single warm up as part of your set count per week, geez, you'd be well outside the recommended ranges anyway. But also, if you did count that as part of your working sets, you would be falling very short of getting a lot of stimulatory volume throughout the week as well. Because, like, say for example, if you're like doing like typically if you're working up to like a heavy set of squats or deadlifts or something like that, you're probably doing between 3 to 4 warm up sets, right? So if you count those as part of your working sets, well, you probably reached your kind of set count already. But then as well, you could perform half your volume for the week within those warm-ups, essentially, you know. So I would be the same as Lawrence. I would mainly count something that meets a kind of minimum RP threshold, probably 6 as like the minimum, or simply just counting like the harder sets as well.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. But just pick one and run with it forever.
Yeah, exactly. That's the main thing with counting volume. I think people can get a little bit kind of too in the head. It's like, oh well, like I did a close grip bench press, so I count like half of that for my triceps.
I lifted in the bag of coal for my mother, so I count that as well. Just fucking stick to your hard sets. Yeah. All right. Some of them are really fucking vague.
I know. This is the nature of question asking.
This one, okay, right, okay. And I want this. I want to get through one or two more, so we're both going to keep this one at 2 points. So 2 recommendations. So the advice for someone wanting to start powerlifting for the first time.
Advice for I think
2 points. That's all we're allowed to say.
Okay, the best thing I think you should probably do is get a coach for powerlifting. I think that is going to excel your progress more than pretty much anything else with starting powerlifting. And I think after that, the second thing would be to sign up for a meet, because you can train for powerlifting as much as you want, but you will never get the experience of powerlifting unless you sign up for the meet. And I think that's kind of where the actual kind of drug lies as such.
The non-anabolic drug that is powerlifting in of itself.
Yeah.
I would go. I'm going to assume that the person has already signed up with a coach, and I'm also going to assume that the person has already signed up for a meet. So I'm going to give you some advice, kind of broadly. So first one, let's say you're hypothetically you're signed up for a competition. So competition day, plan. Make sure if whatever federation if you're competing in, if it's IPO or if it's an AB series comp or if it's an IPF comp or WRPF comp, have a look at the rules. So some of the rules between federations are a little bit different. So plan far enough in advance, know what the competition rules are. I've seen it in warm-up rooms plenty of times where you're standing there and someone doesn't know that they have to keep their knees straight, or they don't know if there is a press command or a start command or something. So kind of do a little bit of research and plan ahead. Make sure you've all your comp equipment. You have loads of food. The second one then for competition day would be go 9 for 9. Don't leave. Don't just go for Hail Marys from the start. Try and have I suppose again goes back to planning, but have a little bit of a plan in place. Right, that's that one.
It's all about where you start and not where you finish. It's like it's all about it's not about where you start, it's where you finish. It's all about where you start.
All right, easy one. Hack squats or leg press for hypertrophy?
Okay, so I suppose like you have to kind of ask like hypertrophy of what, because depending on where you have your foot placement on the actual platform, you can target similar muscle groups. Then as well, other things that will change even the foot placement is like the angle of the platform. Some platforms will have you start off in like more plantar flexion where your toes are pointed forward, and some will have you in dorsiflexion where your toes are pointed up, and that is going to change the kind of range of motion that you can potentially get depending on what your mobility is going to be like. So say for example, with me, I've got pretty shit ankle mobility. So if I am on a leg press or a hack squat, which has me more dorsiflexion where my toes are pointed up, I can't get as much forward knee travel.
Fuck. No, you don't have shit ankle mobility. You squatting flats, you fucking mad bastard.
For bit, yes, but I would get more kind of hip and erectors doing squats. I've got very strong erectors, but I've got shit quads, right? So for me to get like more quads on like a hack squat or a leg press, I need to use like heels or use some kind of wedge on them. So, and then as well with the two like machines as such, you can have such variation between even branding of machines too. So you can't necessarily say, well, like, should we do one or the other? I suppose from if you're training as a powerlifter, one of the considerations that you may need to have when it comes to doing a hack squat, for example, is it does load your spine quite a bit. And if you're doing a lot of already heavy loading of your spine, like if you're doing a lot, like obviously deadlifting, squatting, or yelling like good mornings or anything like that, that could just add on like extra fatigue that maybe you don't necessarily need, and maybe you get better stimulus from a leg press. But yeah, I suppose the kind of other question would be like, do you need to have either or in your program, or can you do both?
Very good. Totally agree. I'd agree with you about the consideration maybe for loading of less spine on leg press for powerlifters. I think for powerlifters, if you can keep something off your back as often as you can for your accessories or any kind of tertiary exercises like a leg press or anything, I think it's usually a good idea.
If they're a bit more resilient.
Nice, nice nuanced answer there, Shane. Well done. Right. Okay. Right. Thoughts on final one. Then we'll let this be. Let this be it. Thoughts on programming heavy squats and deadlifts on the same day. Whoever, for the most part, I think if. I would say it's for powerlifting, it's kind of competition specific, so it fits the specificity box there. Because if we're like outside of literally working up to a max squat, bench, and deadlift single, having heavy lifts paired up together is specific to the sport. What is also a programming consideration though is how to mitigate fatigue from session to session, because you've inter-session fatigue going from squat to going from say squat session A to deadlift session on day 2, where you'd have the intra-session fatigue then from heavy squatting and then heavy deadlifting. So there's nothing necessarily wrong with them being programmed together. It's just you have to weigh up the pros and cons of that fatigue and what you can mitigate then during the week. Because if you have your heavy squats and heavy deadlifts together, how long will that fatigue last? How long will it take to dissipate? and what sessions do you have afterwards that will or won't be affected by it. I have had people that I've programmed heavy squats and deadlifts on the same day for. So let's say if you have someone that like their work schedule doesn't really allow them maybe to train on competition equipment maybe more than once a week. I might have it done. I might do it that way if they're coming into competition. I usually don't really like it far away from competition, just because I think going into heavy deadlifts fatigued all the time isn't really optimal. I think doing some deadlifts in a fatigued state or benching in a fatigued state does make sense from a specificity point of view, but I think for long-term success in your deadlift, I think going into deadlifts fresher for the most part would pay more dividend long-term.
Yeah, I think like obviously as you mentioned there, like the kind of you do need to manage your like volume intensity pretty well between the two lifts on the day. And I mean, just because you're doing heavy squat and deadlifts doesn't necessarily mean that you need to do a ton of volume as well. Like
Yeah.
you could do two heavy singles on both of them on the same day, and you could have some lower intensity volume work. Just you're trying to keep RP like relatively low. Like I suppose if we go back to what we were discussing with data-driven strength like a few months ago, when they were talking about like the kind of first reps of the sets, like they're going to be like the most indicative of like your of your squats on a day, right? Because you're going to be doing those in your kind of fresh state. So if you had a moderate intensity kind of set of squats and you kind of broke that up into like clusters of like sets of two to try to limit the like velocity drop off between sets, like I think that could be definitely something that you look to incorporate. But yeah, I suppose as Lawrence mentioned, probably wouldn't want to be something that you are absolutely pushing to the absolute limit on either of them on the same day, because like first of all, for what like what benefit would you really be getting from it overall, other than like feeling like you got a fucking savage session in? And you have to think about like what the long-term kind of adaptation or long-term goal that you want to get from doing the two on the same day is.
Yeah, I actually think like deadlift, like having some kind of like moderate RP, getting a little bit of some squat volume before deadlift, not necessarily wrong with that. A little bit of bench volume maybe before deadlifting, not necessarily wrong with that either. If your program needed to be set up that way, but I think by and large, if you were just chasing squat adaptation or deadlift adaptation, I think having minimizing fatigue going into that session would probably be into either or would probably be the best route. Because like you said, like when we're looking at like rep velocity, we are trying to maximize the I suppose neural adaptations would kind of depend on maximizing the concentric velocity of the rep. So if we are kind of moving loads slower, that kind of neural learning over time does kind of decrease force output.
Oh, show.
Yeah, right. All right, we'll do one or two more, but we'll do one more, and we'll just do like one more. Okay, final one. So, can you maximize progress running push-pull legs once a week?
I would say no. Reason
I
for
would,
huh?
yeah, I would agree.
Yeah, so I suppose the reason that I would kind of say this is because if you are only training 3 days per week, your volume is going to be like you could get in like a sufficient amount of volume, but the actual quality of the volume may not necessarily be the best, because it is going to be essentially training like all your sets for one muscle group on any given day, right? So if you are training with that level of frequency, the level of kind of quality volume that you can get in and the amount of total load that you can maybe use per muscle group as well is going to be lower. But then as well, even just from like if we assume that, changes in muscle protein synthesis are going to relate to kind of long-term training adaptations. If you're only inducing exercise-induced muscle protein synthesis once per week, that is leaving too long between sessions where the muscle is not necessarily being stimulated.
Yeah. And that's like, I suppose that's kind of from a frequency perspective why bodybuilders would train everything as a norm twice a week.
Yeah.
Maybe legs, they'll say they train legs twice a week, but they'll separate it out into like a quad day, so a knee extensor day, and then into a hip and knee extensor day or something like that. That's kind of what it usually gets broken down to. So like you said, like if you are trying to maximize hypertrophy, at least when you're more regularly getting in muscle protein synthesis via training, that you're getting an anabolic stimulus more often. So having once a week, you will make progress. Will it maximize progress? No. I'd probably say if it was a case that you could only do 3 sessions a week, having 3 full body sessions where you were doing probably the same exercises but just spreading them out across the week, I would probably say you could see near optimal progress training 3 days a week. No, it wouldn't be the best, but you would definitely see very good progress if you took all of your push exercises, all your pull exercises, and all your leg exercises and spread them out across the week, with maybe your leg exercises taking priority at the start of your session. So if you had like a tier system that you had priority exercises, so maybe your legs get priority twice, that they're early in the session, and then maybe you have a push exercise taking priority early in a session or something like that. But you have it that your important stuff goes at the start, and then your accessory or kind of, I don't know, less complicated lifts, should we say, maybe go at the end of the session, something like that. But other full legs once a week, maybe not best idea.
Yeah, and then I suppose you could also, if you're running that system, I suppose like throughout your life course as well, you may need to go through periods where you're only training like 3 days a week for like time constraints or whatever like that. So like utilizing something like that, and also then you could go back to Dr. Pack's research and use like the minimum effective dose stuff to continue like making strength gains during those time periods as well. We may only need like 3 sets per week on lift. Not bad.
100%. Right, that's us done with the Q&As.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it. I mean, Irish Nationals is next weekend, so hopefully everybody in Ireland is fucking buzzed up for that. Wish everybody the best. I'm very much looking forward to watching that. Well, it means I'm gonna have to get up very, very early to watch some of the flights, but I need to see the boys and the girls smash it, and Abs take home another title.
Can't wait. Yeah, that's it. That's us.
All right, Grant, thank you very much for listening. If you'd like the podcast, make sure to like Spotify, share on your stories on Instagram, and drop a comment on the YouTube. All right, that's it. Good luck. Talk soon.